If you need to get up and fan yourself for a minute, go back and get some water. This is a really exciting talk that I've been really excited for us to be able to bring this year. So our closing keynote address is going to be by Michael Tremko. Michael graduated from Gonzaga University in 2014 with his master's. Now, Michael's got a long history. I've known Michael for a couple of years from afar. And I see him as one of the experts in the area of orthomolecular psychiatry. So Michael is going to have a book coming out soon on cranial electrical stimulators. Michael has little tricks in his pocket. Michael had a past life as an EMT. He worked in a psych unit in Oregon State Hospital for 10 years in forensics and on the maximum security unit. He also worked at Cedar Hills Hospital, which had an active duty military unit for treatment of PTSD. So Michael's got a pretty extensive history in working with some very difficult or challenging, I guess the word should be challenging, not difficult, but I guess it could be difficult too. As challenging as difficult, same thing. Some really challenging patients. So Michael has 2 kids, a 6- and 7-year-old little girl named Liberty Rose and Mayflower. I know, right? I said this, oh, how beautiful. So if you would like to join me in welcoming our final keynote speaker for the day that will close out the psychopharmacology conference, please welcome Michael Tremko.
All right, Debbie, thank you for that wonderful introduction. All right, well, so my name's Mike Tremko. I'm here to talk about orthomolecular psychiatry. We already kind of did an about me. Oh, wait, I have the clicker thing. Wait, is this it? Yes. All right. Yeah, private practice in Portland, Oregon, avid biohacker. Anybody know what biohacking is here? We also drink bulletproof coffee, listen to Dave Asprey. No? One? It's my friend Bill. Do have an upcoming book about cranial electrotherapy stimulators. If there was any time to talk about them here, I might try to sneak it in a little bit. And I'm an amateur researcher with a lot more questions than answers, and I think more books than I own than I've read at this point. I have just like stacks of them. After I got out of school, I just found all these interesting rabbit holes to go down. So what I hope you'll take away today, to see how we can treat causes instead of symptoms. And to me, this is kind of a way of thinking about how to assess the patient. You know, like one possibility is to take out a Hamilton D17 and score it for symptoms of depression. And another one is to think about what's causing the depression. You know, there's a lot of different reasons why somebody might be depressed. And I do know that there's people that think that depression is the same no matter how you got it, and it's always a serotonin problem, so you always need a serotonin solution. It's okay to review patient nutrition as possible symptom causes. And there's some over-the-counter treatment options that are really interesting, and a lot that I've become disappointed with. So there's a lot of over-the-counter things. I'm not necessarily looking always for an over-the-counter solution. It's just what's the best solution for them. And I hope that you would also see vitamin therapy as safe, cheap, readily available, and with little downside. That would be nice. So we're going to talk about the definition of orthomolecular psychiatry. Everybody loves definitions, right? Everybody love definitions? Yeah. So we're going to do that. And we're going to talk about the 3 waves of orthomolecular psychiatry. I made this up on Sunday, but I had to divide it out somehow to organize the talk, so you're not going to find this anywhere else. Orthomolecular psychiatry is the variation of the concentration of substances native to the human body for the purpose of optimal function. That's Linus Pauling's definition. So he was among the early adopters of orthomolecular psychiatry. So in other words, the body affects the mind, and orthomolecular psychiatry focuses on curing the body with naturally occurring elements. Okay. Precursors. We're going to start with the precursors first. Sigmund Freud and Emil Kraepelin. So these were two psychiatrists in the late 1800s who both decided to abandon what was seen at their time as the traditional psychiatric interventions of tying people to chairs and put a box on their head or dunk them in cold water or spin them around really fast. They didn't think it was going to work, so they wanted to try something else. So Freud came up with psychoanalysis, and he gave his patients a lot of cocaine. Apparently, he also came up with a system kind of like reflexology in the nose, where you put cocaine in different spots in the nose to treat different areas of the body. I don't know a whole lot about that, but I thought it was interesting. And then Emil Kraepelin, so he was another psychiatrist. He ran a mental health hospital in Lithuania. And he decided to not use those treatment methods as well, but he decided that rather than treating people with anything, he was going to observe his patients, and he was going to document the course of the illness and see what he could learn. So I commonly see his name in the books as the person that came up with the first kind of hierarchy of diagnoses. So that's where that came from. And having gone back to his original 1921 book, which was Manic Depressive Insanity and Paranoia. I mean, you can read his original descriptions of all of these things in the language of the day. Very interesting stuff. And the thing that they don't say about Kraepelin is that he thought of mental illness as being basically one of two problems. It was either a problem with thinking or a problem with feelings. And problems with thinking were all the same. It was all dementia praecox, which means early dementia. Later on, we call it schizophrenia. We still call it schizophrenia. But just last year, I started to see some research coming out saying that the damage that schizophrenia causes in the brain is in the same places as the damage that's caused by dementia. Like, he might have actually been onto something. And then problems with feelings is also all the same thing. It's all manic depression. And I'm going to rip off a little of Dr. Gami right now and just mention that what he thought is that all the different symptoms of emotional mental illness were all from the same original cause. Like there was one thing that went from the very slightest colorings of mood all the way out to the most serious kinds of mental health illnesses. It was the same underlying mechanism of action. So there weren't all these different diseases. It wasn't major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder, all those things. That those were all kind of like different flavors of ice cream. But they're all ice cream. They're all the same thing. They're different kinds of the same thing. That's coming back into favor now. There's some new research in that area published in 2016 and 2017, a couple new textbooks that very interesting stuff, and they build directly on what Kraepelin said. Okay. Syphilis. So the reason I'm bringing up syphilis is because this is a medical disorder that has nervous system damage properties to it. So pre-1940s, before we had antibiotics, long-term patients wound up in mental health wards because their minds were deteriorating. And late 1940s, we began treating early syphilis with penicillin when it was still a sexually transmitted infection stage. Anybody here seen a syphilis patient in a mental health ward with your own eyes? You have or haven't? You have? We got 2, 3? Okay. You know, it's funny. I think that knowledge is just sort of disappearing. You know, I never hear anybody talk about what happened with syphilis back then. So once penicillin came around, we treated syphilis that way. The mental health wards for syphilitics were eliminated, and that's no longer really seen as like a mental health problem. Mental health problem could be caused by a medical disease and could be prevented by a pharmaceutical. Pellagra. Here's another a physical medical problem, pellagra. So pellagra is it's a vitamin B3 deficiency. And it was first described in 1735. So that's a long time before we knew what vitamins were or that you could do anything with them. But the disease was definitely described then. The first successful treatment of the disease, pellagra, the classic symptoms are diarrhea, dermatitis, dementia, and death, and psychosis that can be indistinguishable from schizophrenia. France decided that they wanted to eliminate pellagra from their society, so they went on a campaign to remove corn from people's diets. Corn can leach vitamin B3 out of the body, so that can be one factor. Has anybody seen the stories that came out recently about the French hamsters that lived in cornfields that turned into cannibals? Anybody see those? Yeah, there were, no? Yeah. Yeah, so there were hamsters that lived in the wheat fields close by that did not turn into, cannibals, but the ones that lived in the cornfields did. And their population is just diminishing right now, and apparently they're going to die out pretty soon. And I didn't see the word pellagra in the story, in the news stories that I read. So France decided that they wanted to eliminate corn from their country, and pellagra was mostly eliminated from France. And then the United States in 1906 was when our pellagra epidemic hit. And pellagra affected 3 million Americans and killed 100,000 people. Oh, thank you.
Sorry, I forgot to check.
So Dr. Joseph Goldberger experimented with diet and found that increasing animal products in the diet plus brewer's yeast would reverse pellagra. How he ever came up with that combination, I'll never know. But he did not isolate a single cause for it. Conrad Elvesham of the University of Wisconsin at Madison demonstrated in 1937 that once niacin was isolated in a lab and could be manufactured, so then they have niacin to use. In 1937, that niacin cured a form of pellagra that affects dogs. Radiological studies of people afflicted with pellagra showed reduced bone density in multiple cavities. Part of the disease process appears to leach the mineral content out of the skeleton and excrete it from the body. Which is just, I don't know, I just thought that was a fun fact. And there used to be pellagra wards in mental hospitals. Has anybody ever seen a pellagra ward? Or work in a hospital that used to have a pellagra ward? Anybody? No? Okay. So pellagra cases originally were cared for in mental hospitals up until the 1940s, rather than medical hospitals because of the hallucinations. There are no more pellagra wards because the problem was a nutritional one and it was resolved through nutritional means. Vitamin B3 is now added to the flour that's used in breakfast cereal, for example. So when you go down the aisle and you see fortified with 8 essential vitamins and iron, that's because the government has mandated that flour be augmented with vitamins and iron. And that's what stopped the pellagra epidemic in our country. So once again, we have an example of what was once considered a mental health problem as having a biological cause. But this time, instead of a pharmaceutical, it was cured with vitamins. The term orthomolecular emerges. So Dr. Abram Hoffer is considered one of the founders of the field of orthomolecular psychiatry. He called it nutritional psychiatry, and he's most famous for having done the first double-blinded studies in psychiatry ever. His most famous work was for his long studies of niacin and its treatment of schizophrenia. Anybody here of using niacin as a treatment for schizophrenia before? Okay, we'll get to that. His work was disputed by the American Psychiatric Association in 1973. Hoffer published a few responses to the APA's criticisms, but they remained firm in their denial. Dr. Hoffer continued to use and study niacin's effect on his patients and did so for the next 50 years. He passed away recently, and his last book, I believe, was published in 2006 on the subject of niacin. His work remains unaccepted by the medical community today, despite numbers of patients who have reported benefits. When I heard that there was a treatment for schizophrenia that involved niacin, I couldn't help myself. I just started buying these books. This was the first one I bought, and it just seemed like such complete science fiction. I couldn't relate to anything that was talked about in this book at all, because he would meet people with schizophrenia, and he would get them started on basically a niacin regimen, and the schizophrenia would resolve, and they would no longer be ill. So it wasn't a treatment, it was a cure. So his book has an interesting theory called the adrenochrome hypothesis, in which the culprit is adrenaline from an overactive fight or flight response, which is transformed into adrenochrome, which causes the brain to hallucinate. Hoffer did some work with LSD and demonstrated that you can stop an LSD trip with niacin. I'm so glad I read about that, because then I ran into a young man who had been taking LSD recreationally for some time, and who was, at that time, he was stuck in delusional thought all day long, every day. And it was for about a year and a couple of months. So I discussed several options of treatment with his mother. She liked the idea of trying niacin with him. And within a month, he went from delusional and hallucinating to thinking clearly 75% of his day every day. So he still had some remainder, but I'll take 75% improvement in a month. The experience of working with him has definitely stayed with me. In my very short career so far, I've only treated 3 people who have schizophrenia. One was him. So that drug-induced schizophrenia, as opposed to like a genetic form. Second patient is a young man, 27. He had ear infections from when he was a baby and grew up deaf. Was diagnosed with schizophrenia because of delusional thoughts, and he was on Abilify for about 5 years before I met him. After meeting him, his prescriber had retired, I believe. So when I took over his case, I said, okay, let's continue the medications as ordered and add niacin. Let's add niacin to your regimen, and let's see if that will help things. The place where it helped the most was in the negative symptoms. When he'd first come to my office, his presentation was very down. He didn't really look around one-word answers. You know, maybe that could be being shy and a new provider or something like that. It definitely could be the case. But that was the impression, that was what I saw in front of me when I saw him. And it was about 6 months later when his mother brought him back to me again, and it was like I could see the person inside. You know, he was so flat before, and now you could kind of see the face of this person emerging. It was like he had more emotional content on his face that I could see, if that makes any sense. And he was smiling from time to time. He went from basically sitting on a chair in his apartment. His mother would come in with boxes of things, and she would take care of his place and him. And now he would get up when she came in and go open the door. He figured out how to bake a frozen pizza. It's all simple things. And then the next time I saw him, he was driving to the gym to work out. He told me a joke, which I thought was very interesting. And it was good, too. I don't remember it, but it was a good one. I believe I laughed. What was the other thing? Now, like today, the last time I saw him, he might be getting into foosball tournaments. You can go out in the world and play foosball. There's tournaments in Oregon from place to place. Very different from the guy that I saw before. That had nothing to do with hallucinations, but the negative symptoms of schizophrenia, I think, are also something like we don't have tons of tools in psychiatry to address that issue, and this is one possible way of doing that. Linus Pauling. Anybody know Linus Pauling? Know who that is? Yeah. The vitamin C guy, who won 2 Nobel Prizes solo. Is the only person in history to do that. So Dr. Pauling is also famous for descending into quackery, as some reporters say, after he read Dr. Abram Hoffer's work with niacin and decided to perform similar studies with megadoses of vitamin C. He claimed large doses taken intravenously could cure some cancers. His claims were widely denied and ridiculed, though he responded by pointing out that those later studies attempting to replicate his work failed because they didn't actually replicate his work. He used IV vitamin C, where later studies administered the vitamin in pill form. When I went to the Orthomolecular conference in Toronto last year around this time, and they had a full day devoted to IV vitamin C administration. And they talked about the difference in blood levels you can get from the tablets. It's not that much of an increase, but by IV means, if I remember right, it was something like 8 to 10 times greater blood concentration of IV vitamin C. Big difference. Yeah, the dosages and length of time for that treatment differed as well. The treatment method remains controversial to this day, and though there are certainly reports from cancer patients as to the benefits of vitamin C therapy, the industry indicates that any benefits are generally determined to be the placebo effect. You know, at the conference, I also met a delegation from Japan. Apparently, orthomolecular medicine is taken off in Japan. They love it, and they have clinics. They said something like 1,500 clinics in Japan, and I saw photographs of these long tables of people that all had bags of IV vitamin C hanging above them. Quackery. Unfortunately, and just like traditional Western medicine, some snake oil salesmen have gotten mixed up in orthomolecular medicine and psychiatry. The reason I bring this up is to encourage people not to see the word orthomolecular as like a brand and to do your own homework on every individual thing that you're looking at yourself. You never know, somebody might be wrong about something. The Weston A. Price Foundation's website claims a cure for cancer on their main page. So does the webpage of the Iodine Crisis and various organizations and speakers who specialize in vitamin C. It's something you should know about before taking what anyone says is the truth. I'm not so sure that vitamin C or vitamin K2 or iodine is a cure for cancer. Part of the reason I'm telling you about this, let's get through that. On the flip side, we all know that the pharmaceutical industry is 100% honest and ethical in all of its claims. So we've got that counterpoint. My point is, I would still consider this a young field, and at this time we're learning at a great pace, but we have a long way to go. So I got a short break in here. Does anybody want to just kind of, no, keep going? Keep going, okay. No breaks? I just figured it's 75 minutes, come on. All right. Things we were not taught in school. Whoops, that didn't work. Green button, right?
So nutrition has been neglected, and I think the reason for that is that until 1950, nutrition was an essential element of medicine. It was one of the most important aspects of medicine. And between 1930 and 1940, which was the golden age of vitamin discovery, the medical profession took vitamins extremely seriously. And every time a scientist got the Nobel Prize for discovering a new vitamin, everyone got very excited and alerted. And during these 10 years, a large number of very important papers were published by doctors dealing with these various vitamins. But in 1950, there was a major change. The American medical profession got the idea that we knew everything there was to know about nutrition. Therefore, they dropped it out of the medical curricula. And they don't teach it today. At UBC, that's the University of British Columbia Medical School, in 4 years medicine, they get 1 hour of nutrition. I spoke to a medical student from Ontario, and I asked her, how many hours of nutrition did you get? And she said, nearly 1 hour. So I said, what do you mean nearly 1 hour? She said, he never showed up. Can you imagine doctors being trained for 4 years in medicine without having more than 1 hour of nutrition, which is usually given to them by a professor of biochemistry, who may know his vitamins, he may know the chemistry of vitamins, but he knows nothing about nutrition. There's a major difference. So doctors today are almost totally ignorant, and they know that. The leaders of the medical profession know that they don't know anything about nutrition. And that's a major problem. So nutrition has fallen by the wayside. It's no longer taught anywhere. It's left by its own. It's kind of an orphan aspect of medicine. Now, the genius of Dr. Linus Pauling was that the term orthomolecular highlighted what we were trying to do. And it's the best descriptive word there is. There's no better word than that, because it refers to the use of optimum amounts of the right nutrients, compounds that the body is familiar with. They're not strange. They're not things, what we call xenobiotic. They're not strange things.
Did everybody hear him? You did? Okay, good. Yeah, and at Gonzaga, we were taught that the first solution to depression symptoms is an antidepressant. You know, I remember when my professor said, okay, you know, somebody comes to your office and they complain of depression. What do you prescribe them? And so he asked the question to the class. And so the answer started coming back from the group, okay, Lexapro, I would use Lexapro. And then somebody else, I'm going to use Prozac. And somebody else would say Surzone, if Surzone hadn't been taken off the market already at that point. And so he had a long board full of all these answers of what medication you would prescribe to somebody for depression. And he said, you're all right. And I thought, I think I just wasted $90,000. And because how could we all be right? And so it turns out that he liked the STAR-D method of medication prescription. Anybody familiar with STAR-D? Everybody know STAR-D? He thinks of it as evidence-based practice. So in the end, the STAR-D conclusions were that mechanism of action doesn't matter. You can't know which medications are going to work for anybody. Titrate the doses up quickly until you either get to side effects or remission. If you get side effects, switch or augment, switch to CBT, which was no better. Everything was about 30% effectiveness, and there wasn't a whole lot of value in learning anything about this. And that just sounded so disappointing. Like, really? That's the best we've got? Later on that year, I found I wanted to write a paper about that topic and just see if, has anybody come up with a way to know in advance what medication is going to work for somebody? And I found a series of studies by Dr. Ian Cook of the UCLA brain. I'm going to mess it up because they changed the name of this organization like 3 times. It's like Brain and Physiology Lab, something like that. And he used an EEG to divide people into subgroups. So he had everybody come in, and everybody got an EEG scan, and then they all started on fluoxetine. 48 hours later, they come back for a second scan, and then another scan at weeks 1, 2, 3, et cetera, to 8. And they found that there's a measurement called cordance that you can read on an EEG that's essentially depression. And if that value falls in response to the medication, then the person is improving because the medication is treating their depression. If the patient reports that they feel better, but cordance doesn't fall, that's the placebo effect, and they peel off of the main group at about 6 weeks. So you could divide these patients into subpopulations based on their response to the medication as measured by the EEG, and in doing so, you would double the performance of both medications in that same patient population by dividing them in that way. So I wrote my paper about this, and I went to my professor and was like, hey, take a look. He sent me an email that said, excellent. I was very proud of that, though, he thought it was excellent. Is anybody familiar with the methylation cycle? Talk to us all about it? The main thing I can tell you about the methylation cycle is that I don't understand it yet. I just know it's there. I know it's there, and there's people who, it's also tied in with the MTHFR, what do you call it again, mutation? The MTHFR mutation. It's like if they have the mutation, you give them Deplin. It turns out this methylation cycle thing is pretty complicated. It's got a lot of moving parts. And the reason that niacin stops hallucinations is because of the methylation cycle. It's moving carbon groups out of the body, and the extra carbon groups were part of the process that was causing hallucinations. So that's part of how it stops. But we never heard anything about this in our classes. I think it's important. I really hope that later on schools like mine would change their curriculum and have some information about the methylation cycle for us. Okay. Not that there's anything wrong with Prozac. It's a great drug for people that have major depressive disorder because they have a serotonin problem. But in assessing people that they come into my office for depression, I have some questions for them that I don't know. I haven't heard a lot of talk about these things. But one is whether somebody's had a Roux-en-Y gastric bypass procedure. Right? So the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass procedure cuts out parts of the intestines that absorb B vitamins. So they just don't absorb them anymore. You can put them in your mouth, but they're not going to be absorbed. And the other thing is the Roux-en-Y speeds up the movement of food through the digestive system, so there's even less time it would even be in contact. So if somebody's depressed and they've had a Roux-en-Y procedure, I don't automatically go to serotonin. I go to B vitamins. I think it makes more sense. So I've been using B vitamins in my practice with people that have had some kind of a gastric bypass, or a sleeve, a sleeve kind of does the same thing. Or I had a guy the other day who had a colonectomy. He had no colon. And there's one of the B vitamins is made in the colon, and you don't get it if you don't have a colon. So but the reason I found out about that topic was because I had my gallbladder removed about 4 years ago. And, the surgeon didn't mention anything to me that it was possible that would change my ability to absorb B vitamins. I had no idea. And it took me about 3.5 years to figure out what the problem was. I went to doctor after doctor after doctor, and nobody could figure it out. So I ran into a book called Could It Be B12? I don't know if any of you heard of it. What an eye-opener. I saw all my symptoms in a row and just went, that's why my feet hurt all the time? That's why I can't remember anything? So, and then B12, injected B12 just turned it around like hours. Then I wound up with other side effects, and I had to come up with another way to fix that. And, back to the drawing board. But at least I found out what the problem is. I feel like I'm way further ahead than I was then. But how would you know looking at me that I wasn't depressed? I was laying on the couch all day. I would think about, I should go get a glass of orange juice or something. Get up. No, just lay right back down. But no suicidal thoughts. I did not feel hopeless or helpless. I just didn't have the energy to get off the couch, that's a symptom difference, I also asked patients if they've been taking acid blockers or proton pump inhibitors, because those can keep you from breaking meat down into B12, and then you're not going to absorb it, so then that can cause a B12 deficiency. Or maybe you're a vegan. Any vegans here today? No? Vegan, because you only get B12 from animal sources, so they just don't get it. They don't get B12. So I've had people have come in and said, oh yeah, I've been a vegetarian for about 3 years, and now I'm depressed. So I need an antidepressant or amphetamines or something. But if they haven't eaten any meat in years and they don't take B vitamins, then I think maybe that's where my index of suspicion is going to go with them. There's also the not getting enough sun and winding up vitamin D deficient. So I live in the Pacific Northwest. It's rainy, it's cold, it's dark for a solid 6 months out of the year. And people don't tan. That's not a big sport in the Portland area is getting your tan on. So I have people, go and tan, Go, get a Groupon for $30 and get, all you can tan for a month and go in twice a week and let's see how much does that change things. And my experience this year has been that people who benefit from it, it moves the needle 10 to 30% on depression symptoms from tanning, and it stays with them for a long period of time. Once they activate their vitamin D, they have it activated. If they can make it through the spring, then the summer's there and they'll be out with everybody else by the river and getting their sunshine in. Another possibility is maybe somebody took antibiotics and their gut flora changed. Maybe they never eat fish, or all the fish they eat is fried. And then they're going to have an omega-3 deficiency, which could lead to depression as well as violent thoughts and actions. Or maybe you ate too much fish and you have mercury poisoning. So there's all kinds of reasons why somebody might be depressed that have really nothing to do with a serotonin problem. Maybe all the sugar you're eating is causing depression. Or if you were born via C-section and you didn't get part of mom's gut flora and you got colonized with whatever was floating through that hospital's air circulatory system. That's a place where people get their gut flora is from mom, and it comes from a vaginal birth, not from a C-section. Gastric bypass surgery. This is starting to get complicated. It sure would be easier if I could just prescribe Prozac and get this patient out of my office in 15 minutes the way I was taught in school. But any one of them would have worked. All right. The first orthomolecular book I read was Vitamin K2 and the Calcium Paradox. Has anybody heard of this?